Welcome to Dying in Grace, the program where we talk about that taboo subject, death, dying, and end of life. My name is Arlene Stepputat, and if you're curious about my own journey befriending death, you can go to our website, dyingingrace.com, and there you'll read a little bit about my experience, and you can watch a 3-minute video talking about my experiences losing people I loved and how I started to embrace death as part of life, which is part of the intention of this program, to reintegrate death as part of the full cycle of life. Each week, we bring a community expert to talk about a unique aspect of death and dying. And this week, we are going to explore the impact of theater and how death is portrayed in theater and how it can transform our views and ourselves by a live theater experience. And I'm delighted to welcome our guest this evening, Rod Lathim.
Good to see you.
Local talent, playwright, man about town, just a gift to our community, and I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful you're here. Rod, tell us a little bit about your early experiences with theater. What brought you into theater? What was it?
I was in 5th grade at Cleveland School. I'm a native Santa Barbaran. I went to Santa Barbara Junior High to see The Music Man, my first experience with live theater. My sister was there in school, and Marjorie Luke was directing the show. And I sat through that, and I said, I want to do that. That's when I knew.
So that early.
That was it. Yeah, that early. Yeah, it was a no-brainer for me. So I went to the University of Kansas. I was a music therapy major there. I lasted there 2 years, and I got this concept in my head that I knew I had to come home and do, and that was starting Access Theater, which started in '79, ended in '96. So we had 18 glorious years of producing mostly original work. We were a fully accessible theater company and pioneers in the aspect of accessibility in the performing arts on a global level. So we toured all over.
So for our audience members who may not be familiar with what accessibility really means, could you elaborate about the makeup of your theater company?
Sure. This was before the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we were definitely pioneers. A fully accessible theater basically meant that our doors were open to everyone regardless of physical disability. We worked with people who had physical disabilities, who were deaf, who were hearing, who were blind, who were sighted, and we made our shows fully accessible to audiences. So we interpreted our shows either by using shadow interpreters and or having the whole cast sign for themselves. We did audio description. We were the first company in California to audio describe live theater. Now it's being done on a national level. We open captioned our shows. We worked in theaters that were wheelchair accessible as much as we could, although when we toured around the country,
right,
we found there were many that were not.
Yes, right.
But that was our concept of accessibility.
So that's really a wonderful demonstration before people were actually ready for it or aware of it. To bring out of the shadows people that were disenfranchised or prohibited from having a theater experience or participating in the theater. And for people that watch television now, with all kinds of people being shown, all kinds of diversity, it doesn't seem as unusual. Right, and going to theater where there's a place marked for handicapped and all that stuff. So that's really commendable and important, and is a beautiful example of how theater shapes our views and can change our attitudes. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how theater portrays death and dying, and in a couple of plays that specifically dealt with death and dying, and then we'll talk about your own original creation. I have to just say, too, that in full disclosure, I have a degree in theater as well. And for me, I was 10, I believe, and saw West Side Story in the round, live theater. It I could not believe that people did this stuff. I didn't think I could do it, but I just was mesmerized. And that was it. I was sold, and luckily I grew up on the East Coast, and I started going to Broadway when I was a kid, and I have not stopped.
Lucky you.
I was very lucky. So how theater changes me, and I wanted to talk about one play that I saw first. I don't know if you remember or know, All My Sons.
I saw it so many years ago. It's not fresh in my mind, but yes, a wonderful play.
Just that was the first play that I saw live where it foreshadowed things like family secrets, hidden themes, and essentially it's set after World War II in 1947, and the family's son has died as a pilot. It comes out that the father lies about his business partner and has him incarcerated because they've made broken airplane parts, cylinders. And along the way, you discover that the son who died knew about it and took crashed his plane on purpose because he couldn't live with who his father was. And then the father also ends his life. And it's this profound surprise about death. And I remember thinking, wow, what stories people hide about their lives, and how death was the big secret. So there's that. And then I remember a play called Whose Life Is It Anyway? Are you familiar with that show?
Yep. Again, I saw that about 20 years ago, but yes.
So do you remember, I mean, the theme was about actually euthanasia.
Yeah.
And
the right to die, which is a very, potent topic now, being that California has, I think, recently just adopted some of the similar laws that are in Oregon about the ability to basically, if you have a
End of Life Option Act is what they call it. It's called the End of Life Option Act, and actually it's gone back and forth. It's been in law in California for 2 years, and there was just some kerfluffle, and there was an overturning of it for a short time. So it's back. It's back in, but it's not a smooth sail.
No, and not easy to access.
But that show came out in '72.
Yeah.
So how do you think theater helps shape our values about death and dying?
Well, you know this, but for viewers, theater is a very powerful medium. And many of the shows I've been affiliated with since I've been directing since '79 have been shows, and it's kind of a focus of my life. I really love using theater as a tool for enlightenment, for social change, for changing attitudes, for breaking down barriers, whatever they might be. And I remember when I did Unfinished Business, which we'll get around to, people were saying, we do workshops every week. Well, I work for a hospice organization. I work for this entity, this organization. We're out there printing brochures. We're trying to reach the people. And it's so hard to get people to listen and have a discussion about death. People don't want to talk about it. It's like, I don't want to talk about it. We'll talk about that later. But theater gave people a chance, at least the audiences that came to Unfinished Business, it gave them a chance to kind of step out of that everyday role and be engulfed in a live, visceral event, which is live theater, and deal with these issues of end of life, of dying. And it got people talking. And we had workshops after the show that were sponsored by a local organization because people wanted to keep the conversation going. And they would say to me, the people from the organizations would say, we've been trying to do this for years, and this play is now getting people to talk. So I think that's one of the most potent tools of theater, is that it's so human, and we're losing this ability to tell our stories face to face. It's all this now.
Right.
It's not people talking like we are. Yeah, and that's scary because we're losing our stories, we're losing our identity, we're losing our culture. And that's how we learn from each other, is face to face. And so that's why I love live theater. It is powerful. It does cause people to think. It causes people to leave the theater with a changed, mind. There's a scene in Storm Reading, which we toured for 6 years, which we'll talk about that too, because we're bringing it back after 30 years. where Neil talks about a friend who had a brain injury in an accident, and he talks about how she grew up in the rainforests of Puerto Rico, and she had to learn everything all over again. But the most important thing she did is she learned how to change her mind. And that's kind of says it all.
Yeah,
You know? And I think that's what theater does. It teaches us that we can change our minds.
You know, it's interesting you say this, because I was thinking of another play that was very powerful that I actually saw performed here in Santa Barbara, but it had been a national production, I think, in the 90s, and that's Wit. And that, for people who don't know, is a play about, it's a one-woman show about a cancer, a woman dealing with cancer and her experience in the hospital and how she's treated and just her commentary, and it is so powerful. And when you talk about how people are doing social media and digital stuff, and there is something that is just electrifying in an audience. And actually, once you're committed in the audience, especially if there's a show with no
intermission,
you got to get up or you're staying there. And there's something about the electricity and the energetic of what an audience shares that I think has the power to change. And you can't get that from the movie. I've watched the movie too.
Nope.
It's not the same.
Not the same. No.
And I just, there's something every time plays like these come forward, and of course we just saw it with the Tonys and Angels in America winning, which is about AIDS and one man's journey and just that whole thing.
Through a dying process.
Exactly right.
And actually having
several dying
out of body experiences and almost near death to shared death, but he comes back. We both just saw it. You told me before we went on the air. We both saw it recently in New York. An amazing piece of work. Kushner is brilliant.
But it's the revival. So 20 years ago, he was having that, and every time these plays that I mentioned, they all win these awards. It's like the playwrights who dare to share and go to the taboo subject that people don't really want to know about. They're rewarded. The plays, their standing room, getting the tickets are hot, and
not to mention the fact that the performers in that production were stellar, and two of them won Tonys. Really, really stellar production.
Yeah, it was, but also the riveting dynamic.
Yeah.
And to that end, I think that's where playwrights are very courageous, because they tell a story that moves them and go really out on the limb to assume the rest of the people are interested.
Yeah, and you're putting yourself on the line. With Unfinished Business, I did that. I was scared to death.
Well, that's what I wanted to go to. Tell us about Unfinished Business and your process, and
it's an autobiographical piece. The only thing I've ever written for the theater that was autobiographical. Very, very real for me. Although people who saw it thought that I fabricated it. And it's like, okay, that's okay. You can think I fabricated it. It's fine. Because some people would say, now, you don't expect me to believe this, do you? And I'd say, no, I don't.
So tell people a little bit about the plot.
Yeah, it's based on a journal that I kept the day my mom passed. And I was with her and my dad and my sister in her bedroom, and we knew it was imminent. And
what did your mom die of?
Many complications. She was ill for many years.
Okay.
And she had, we won't even go into that.
Okay.
It's a long story, but she was ready to move on. But what happened, I later found out after I wrote the piece, was that what I experienced actually has a name. It's called a shared death experience. I had never heard of a shared death experience before. So I learned after the fact that what had happened was actually is categorized. And I'm certainly not alone. And I found out afterwards, so many people wanted to, still today, I had a conversation last night over dinner about the play. People want to talk and share their stories that are somewhat similar. But it basically is the encounter of my shared death experience with my mom. What that means, if you haven't heard of this, for me, my particular personal experience was that I I took part of her journey on her last, hours of life, in her life review, in meeting and greeting the people that came to be there with her to help her transition. And when I say people, I mean entities who had passed over already. So the veil basically drops. And it's like, whoop, somebody pulled the curtain and I'm right here in the middle of the circus. And so I grabbed a pad of paper from my dad's desk and I took notes. Because I thought, if I don't remember this, if I don't write this down, I'm never going to remember all this. I literally had conversations with people, relatives, my grandparents, dear friends, neighbors, friends of my mom's, ancestors of my mom who I didn't even know who they were, and some people who were mysterious. One character in particular who showed up and he wouldn't tell me who he was. And he said, "You don't need to know who I am. It doesn't matter. I'm here for your mom." And I'm like, okay. and I pressed, but I couldn't get information out of him.
And I did see the play, and while this is happening for you, your sister's coming in and out and is not having any of it.
No,
right?
No, she wasn't aware of it. I mentioned it to her in passing. Of course, in the moment when your mother is dying, the gravity of that is the emotional intensity of that process is huge. And I'm thinking, she doesn't need this. Nobody else needs to be dealing with this. I'll deal with it quietly myself. But there were times when I would say things out loud and she'd look at me and go,
Who are
you talking to?
Right.
And what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'll explain it. But,
so you developed it into a play.
Yeah.
And then how did it go from, I'm taking my journal into a play to mounting a full production with a cast and getting sponsorships? And it ran for what, 10 performances?
We produced it twice, actually. Yeah, so we did about 16 performances.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you got sponsorships from...
I did, from local...
churches, I know, were behind it. And
I didn't get money from churches, but they were they actually
they
brought
brought their
audiences,
congregations,
which was wonderful. Visiting Nurse Hospice Care let me rehearse in a room they had, which was a huge help. And I had friends who I just said, this is really important to me. Would you be a part of this? And they stepped up readily, and I was deeply grateful.
Well, and when you talked about Access Theater, you talked about having audience talkback. So you had experience with transformation
Yes.
and having people do talk. So was that your idea to have
absolutely.
that
Yeah,
audience talkback?
Yeah, I knew that we would have talkbacks after unfinished business, and they were always some of my favorite moments of the evening, because people I learned so much, and people got
What
a
did
chance
you
to
learn?
share.
What
Well,
are
I
some
learned
of
that
the
I
things?
wasn't alone.
Okay.
I learned that there were many people who were like some who would have the brave souls to actually raise their hand and speak up in that forum, in the audience, which was on stage at the Libero. So it was a very intimate 130 people sitting together on stage. So some people didn't speak out, but the ones who did were saying, I had, this was what happened to me, and I've never told anybody. But even more than that, people, as soon as that would break, I would have people come up and grab my shirt and say, I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you. I've never told anybody about this, but I know you're not gonna laugh at me. You're not gonna think I'm absolutely whack job about this. And I said, no, I won't. And yes, I'm happy to be an ear, because I'm not gonna discount anyone's experience.
Right. And that's so important, because even in the in the dying process, while people might not have those experiences themselves, it's not uncommon for the dying person to say that they're, here's dad in the room, or they're reaching, or they're looking someplace else. I mean, you talk to any hospice nurse and they will tell you that that is a fairly common phenomenon. Now, whether or not that phenomena comes from drugs or lack of oxygen or whatever, the conjecture, I mean, no one really knows where it comes from.
Right.
So there's lots of different explanations, but it is a fairly common phenomena, and does impact people, I think.
Absolutely.
So overall, how did you get the different agencies to sponsor, because that's kind of an extreme point of view for some people.
It
Did
is.
they have to read the script before
Yep.
they agreed to do
They
it?
did. They wanted to read the script, and some people, because I really didn't hold back, and there is discussion in the script about a conflict between two characters about religion, because they had I suppose they were opposing views. They had different views about what their expectations were and what their requirements were about how you have to die, and one saying, we have to let her die in her own way. It isn't about us. It isn't about what we believe. It's about her. It's her journey now. She's got to take that journey. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is that we all die in our own way, and we have to be allowed to do that. And there's nothing worse than having a relative or a friend there yanking you out of your path. I think that's really unfair and cruel.
Even when that yanking is done out of love and
it's
well-intended,
always done out of love, but ugh.
But I've watched people who, for instance, want to feed somebody who stopped eating, and then there's this food is love mentality, and so the dying
guilt.
person,
all
of those
this
things.
guilt, people have to do it in their own way, and it's hard. I mean, death is not an easy thing for the one going through it and for the loved ones around. But I'm hoping that show, and I do feel that Unfinished Business gave people at least a taste of a possibility, that in that moment when you're sitting in a room with someone and they go, I don't believe they're alone. I don't believe that anyone in that room is alone.
Well, and the thing that is important, and to me important in our show, is there may be people that say, I think when you die, nothing happens, and a lot of this is just made up or nice storytelling or help. And that's okay.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So it's kind of, can we have a dialogue about this topic when we can't seem to have a dialogue about very much in this country? Can we have a dialogue about this? Because we're all going to experience it.
Yeah.
We all are. And I so appreciate what you're saying about people being allowed to die the way they do. And, this whole idea of what is a good death. I don't know how your death is supposed to look. It just is how it goes. And, having sat at the bedside of many people, it just is what it is. And each one of us, it has a unique beginning. Everybody's birth is different too. So why should death all look the same way? So I know you have a new project on the horizon, and I want you to tell us how that's also going to retransform us.
Sure. Well, I mentioned earlier with Access Theater, one of our shows called Storm Reading, which premiered at the Libero in 1988. And we toured the show for 6+ years, all over the United States, to Canada, to England, taped it for television at the Libero in 1996. Went to the Kennedy Center, did an NBC special there. It was a big deal for our company. We had just an extraordinary experience. And like Unfinished Business, even though the topic was completely different, Storm Reading had a transformational impact that was unlike anything I've ever seen. And the fact that we got to experience it for 6 years. And now the DVD, which is still being used in classrooms and at universities, it continues to have its impact. But I'm producing this event for the Cottage Rehabilitation Hospital Foundation. It's part of their empowerment series, and they have a speaker usually every year that talks about rehab trends. But this year they came to me and said, would you produce this one? We'd like to focus on the transformational power of the arts. And I went, oh yeah, I'm all over that. I would love to do this. And I couldn't find a speaker, and I thought, what if we bring the cast of Storm Reading back and revisit it? And talk about the transformational power of that show. Well, so we're going to stage some scenes from the show live. We're going to screen some scenes of the television production that we taped at the Libero in '96. Anthony Edwards, who is on our board, and he and I grew up together here in Santa Barbara, is going to host the evening with us. He shot a documentary film on the tour of Storm Reading.
Wow.
So he'll be there along with Neil Marcus, Katie Voice, Matthew Ingersoll and myself on stage. So we'll get people who didn't see the show will get to see a good chunk of it, and they'll get to hear about the process of touring and how it impacted lives.
Well, and I think it'll be kind of like the play within the play type
Yeah.
of deal, because as you're reviewing the transformational experience for these people or where it's come from, its history, no doubt people will be transformed about the experience.
Exactly.
And I think any plans to revamp or remount Unfinished Business?
Not in the short-term horizon. I would love to do that show again. I was going to do a production up in Sacramento, and I was working with a hospice organization up there, and the woman who was spearheading it left. So it's kind of like, okay, I guess that's not going to happen right now. But I'm always open to working with organizations that are interested in the piece, and hospice organizations tend to be the key, folks.
Right.
So I will always embrace opportunities to do that show again.
Well,
And I wanted to mention Storm Reading is going to be September 21st at the Libero. One night only.
All right, that's
Yeah.
great. That's great, and I think we'll have some information for our viewers as well.
We'll post that.
So, Rod, I want to thank you for your leadership, your courage, and for telling the truth of your own experience so that theater can transform. And I just want to invite you to sign our book of Living Love. And this is, it says inside, to live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. So perhaps you'd like to list somebody's name in here.
Sure.
I want to invite our audience members. You can follow us on Twitter, and you can go to dyingingrace.com, and you too could add your own name of someone you love in our book of Living Love. I want to thank TVSB for once again supporting this program, and my wonderful crew, Elliot Jacobson, Michael Nicholson, Ken Baxter. Remember, to live in hearts we live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. Thanks.
Thank you.